Hello everyone, this is the Chubby Funster. Welcome to the first part of what will be the first deep analysis in the Adventure Design series. We're going to be looking at Destroyer of Worlds by Andrew E.C. Gasca. It is published by Free League for the Alien role-playing game. There will be near total spoilers in this video, so if you're going to be a player in this, hold off on watching it until after you have done that. I love the hell out of this module. The quality of the writing is amazing, the art is inspired, but nothing is perfect. The main issue I have is with organization because there's a metric fuck ton of content packed into just 88 pages, and the world building is incredibly rich. Getting your head around all this content is very challenging. As written, this adventure can really only be run effectively by a skilled, veteran GM with excellent improvisation and memorization ability. A lot of this video will cover methods and strategies that I think can be useful in any context for managing large amounts of information, but are specifically adapted to this module. I'm going to be looking at these topics in detail, examining what's here and what can be made easier. And I think we can pull a lot of stuff out as general principles of good design that can be applied to any other adventure that you want to run. This one just serves as a template for how I want to approach things going forward because information and distributing it to the players and how you communicate and run the game as a GM is essential in this adventure. I think the best way to think about it is as a huge pile of Legos, and not just basic bitch Legos, like really awesome Legos, stuff you can't get anywhere else, Legos that will blow your mind. And everything you need is here, it's right here to create this fantastic experience, but you have to do it. The instructions leave a lot to be desired, and the GM has to fill in a lot of the gaps and dig around for the Legos that they need. I'm going to help you sort and organize these Legos in a way that makes the process easier. And I'm going to show you how to combine the pieces in a way that will make it all work better together. So let's get started. What is in this box of Legos? There are four main categories of information in the book. Locations is by far the largest. The Arearchus colony is vast, with essentially 6 small dungeons, 1 huge dungeon, and tons of detail on the moon and its recent history. The GM has to describe all of the stuff to the players as they explore the world. Personalities covers the description of critical NPCs, what they know, their goals, and how they change over time. The GM uses this as a guide to describe NPC behavior during conversations. Events describe sudden bursts of change that alter the decision landscape for the PCs. Events force the players to adapt. They add the dramatic element to this adventure. For example, you're supposed to fly back to base in your dropship, but an event destroys the dropship, so now you have to come up with another plan. And finally, opposition. This is mostly crunchy mechanical stuff, but aliens are not goblins and orcs. They have a life cycle, they grow powerful, they change, and you need to understand how that works. What makes this module so challenging to run is the intersection of all of these points. At any given point in time, the players are going to be at a location, and they might run into an NPC with a secret agenda that's described on a different page from the location. And an event might kick off, and you need to know all that content as well, again, on a different page. And an event might bring in an alien whose stats are on yet another page. I've run this module 3 times now with 3 different groups. I consider myself very good at this, and I still have to do a ton of prep before running it, so I have everything fresh in my mind, and even then I still use several improvised solutions to manage it, which I'm going to describe as we go through. You can't get this level of richness without a cost, and most of that cost is going to be paid by the GM. I accept that it's a fundamental trade-off. This is not a one-page dungeon you can run on short notice. This is an incredible experience. Free League divides this adventure into 3 acts, but I actually disagree with them. My experience at the table tells me that there are really 4 phases that players go through in this module. The first phase is exploration. They're given a task and a wide open colony to explore. I'm going to break down how this works in a few minutes, but ultimately they're going to find and explore 4 specific locations: the spaceport, the Oblivion Bar, the Marshall Station, and the medical facility. And at each location, they're going to gain information, but the most critical clue, which they can acquire in 3 different ways, points to a handoff that is going down soon. And this creates what I think is the unacknowledged 4th act, the assault phase. At some point, the players transition from being investigators to being hunters. And when they go to the oil refinery, they are no longer chasing leads, trying to figure out what happened in the past. They are now hunting an enemy in the present. And what they find at the oil refinery leads to the insurgent compound. There's a period here where they examine the map ahead of time. They plan a Spec Ops style raid to breach and take out the enemy. They can choose from different vehicles, different deployment patterns, and so on. This is the Rainbow Six part of the module, and it's awesome. The third phase is invasion. A huge event happens. The space Soviets land their forces to take the moon. An EMP disables comms and whatever vehicle the PCs brought with them, and now they have to fight their way back to Fort Nebraska on foot. This is modeled with dynamic locations that get created wherever they need to be. A shootout with a Soviet strike team, a support action for a Marine tank that's in trouble, and so on. And once they reach Fort Nebraska, they move into the final escape phase. This is a 4-level facility with tons of detail. It is now infested with aliens, and the PCs have to explore it like a dungeon, get on the space elevator, and get off of this damn moon. There's a boss fight against Alien Queen and a dramatic conclusion where some or none of the PCs survive. Some of you may remember this slide from my analysis of Phandelver. It was the suggested final form of the overland map that I argued for. You may notice a lot of similarities here. The PCs are moving around between locations, uncovering clues, and pinpointing the enemy. But what makes this a dramatic adventure is the obscene amount of pressure that gets placed on the players. Phandelver doesn't get hit by orbital weapons and the PCs have to find their way through the wreckage and help people survive. The intensity of this module comes from the event design, and the good news is I think this is portable into a lot of other adventures, even in just small ways that will improve play. So let's get into it. The book has 3 pages of background for the GM. I know that doesn't sound like much, but it is. I'm going to use it as an example of how to better organize the information and make it easier to deliver to the GM and the players. My focus with this stuff is always on what is actually important to play at the table. You don't have to cut everything that isn't directly relevant to play, but deep setting content is often much better placed in an appendix or a reference area, if not in a separate source book. I think it's useful to organize content into simple statements so you can see the big picture. What are we really trying to convey to the GM here? What is essential? Sure, it would be great if every GM read every single word that popped out of our mind and onto the page, but we all know they won't do that. So the real question isn't will they read it, but what won't they read? And then we can move that stuff to the appendix in the back for the hardcore who want to read every word. High-level stuff like this chart is incredibly useful. It presents a lot of important stuff at a glance, and it is easily referenced later. This system information on how cold weather is going to impact the characters is also critical. And aside from this part about the counterweight station, most of the content on the 3rd page here is redundant with the descriptions of the locations that are going to be described anyway. So let's clean this up a bit. And then we can combine content in a way that conveys everything we need to describe. And then combine this into a player-facing handout that gives them everything they need to know, and it doubles as GM material because you can just read it yourself before you hand it out to the players. And I want to reiterate here, all that rich backstory of the colony is really interesting to me. I like to read it. And if we put it in an appendix, I can read it whenever I want. But when I'm prepping to run this adventure, this is the level of organizational information that I want. The average adult reads 250 words per minute when it's light, breezy content. Dense and challenging stuff drops that speed to 150 or less. Word count matters. Now, I've run this module for people who've never even played role-playing games before, and I didn't even give them this stuff in writing. I would just say it out loud because I know they won't even read 165 words. But I would say half of the veteran role players that I play with, that I know, would struggle to remember a lot of this after 30 minutes of gameplay has passed. And it's just a 1 minute read. That's why I think a handout is great. They can reference it and look back at any time. And I say this loving this module. I want more people to play it. That is the issue. We have to design adventures for the table, for real people, not for some platonic ideal of a GM sitting down with a massive amount of text and memorizing everything. The goal of an adventure should be for people to play it, and we should design the product to facilitate that goal. So I give the players a short little memo like this, maybe a week before we start playing. It helps get them in the mood to play, it gives them a bit of the story, and it gives them time to think about these things, think about how they are going to relate to those issues when they're actually in the game. And this module uses pregens, and so far I've used them every single time. But aside from this synthetic, none of the pregens are actually connected to the narrative in any deep way that you couldn't fix. So you could potentially allow veterans to make their own custom PCs, and that wouldn't really change anything from a mechanical perspective or from the module's perspective, but it would let players have their own voice in designing things, and it would make it different. One of the problems with running this multiple times is that you're using the same characters, it kind of gets old at a certain point. But if I was going to do this for a fourth run, I would definitely do it with like veterans who are designing their own game, and that would really change things. But I'm out of game groups who've never played it, so I don't know if I'm ever going to do a fourth run. I'm open to it though. So now we're gearing up. People are sitting down to play. What's next? And this is all GM facing material. It's a mix of summary and disclosing events that will happen in the future. In general, I don't think you should mix content like that in the same sections, but oh well. At the start of the adventure, the GM's job is to present reality as it exists, so I don't really want them to be distracted by what's going to happen at the end as well. And the Marines aren't the only ones after these guys. Weyland-Yutani and the insurgents want to capture them alive, each for their own terrible purposes. And this is a good summary of where they all went for the GM to kind of take in at a glance. And then the GM is supposed to deliver this really long monologue to the players to kick off the adventure. And it continues on the next page as well. Fuck no. Don't do that. Your players will fall asleep. On the morning of the game, I give this second player handout to the captain of the squad. This puts them in a position of responsibility right out of the gate. They're going to think about it all day. They're going to think about their position as the captain. And when the game starts, I'm going to rely on that player to explain the mission to their own men. And this makes it feel real, and it allows the GM to focus their attention on other things. I'm belaboring all these points because the mental bandwidth of the GM is critical to the success of a game. And the average person nowadays is overwhelmed with their own daily life, tons of notifications on their phone, tons of content that they're looking at. Their mind is just tapped out. So what are the essential things that need to be known to start playing? There's a series of oil wars going on. The space Soviets are advancing. This colony on a cold rocky moon has been in decline for a while. It's down to a skeleton crew. The time has come to evacuate everything by space elevator and bug out. There's a space Soviet insurgency working against them, and at this critical hour, they have 4 soldiers that have gone AWOL, and it's their job to find them quick. We don't know where they are. Check out the spaceport and the local bar that we know is sympathetic to insurgents. That's all you need to know to start playing. That's it. And that's really true whether you're the GM or the player. A lot of things can be picked up in process. The GM needs to focus their energy on the current situation. What does the spaceport look like right now if the players go there right now? What is happening at that bar right now if they go there right now? Knowing what happens way down in the line at the end of the adventure at the spaceport or at the bar is not as relevant as what they need to know right now. So we've communicated key details to the players. We're ready to roll. Mount up. There's a huge poster map of the colony. This is just a portion of it. I wanted to zoom in a bit to show the level of detail. You can see roads down to little individual streets. The text advises you to tell the players about the bar and the spaceport as possible leads. There's a reason for this, and that's because this adventure has very tight pointer control. Both the spaceport and the bar have interactions that create pointers back at each other. There's a ship in the hangar that the captain is drinking at the bar, so if you get here first, you're going to get a reason to go to the bar, and if you go to the bar first, you're going to get a reason to go to the spaceport. She tells you that a lot of people have been wanting to get off world, and you can use that to try to figure out, maybe somebody is getting another path off world. And there's also random incidents where a colonist said that he saw AWOLs at the bar last night, but it's based on a random chance, so not necessarily going to happen. The bar also has security footage of the night before, and it reveals that somebody is being detained at the Marshall station. And there are also events that can happen. Anywhere on the map that the players are, the GM can just trigger them. There's a street preacher who tells you that he saw 2 of the AWOLs check into the medical facility. Lance Corporal Wright knows that they put a monster inside her, and one of the pre-gens, Dante, starts feeling pain and pressure in her chest. That could lead them to want to get a medical scan and go to the medical facility. And the map is labeled, so enterprising PCs might just see that there's a Marshall station and a medical facility and say, let's go there. At some point, the PCs need to find out that there's a handoff going down at the oil refinery. The easiest way to do this is to be at the medical facility when Carvalho bursts. He starts saying that he's never going to get to the refinery, and then an alien bursts out of his chest. The hardest way to do this is to interrogate Ivan Stolz at the Marshall station. That requires 2 successful manipulation checks, and most of the Marines are really shitty at that skill. And this guy is complaining about having heartburn, which is a red herring. He isn't really carrying a chest burster, but I had a player hear that and just instantly light this guy up with a flamethrower. So it's not a 100% reliable method of giving out information. There's also a sidebar in the marshal's office that describes comms, computers, and cameras. Now, aside from the jail cam, you could make all of this content available to any player that starts using the comm in their APC to ask for information remotely, but in my experience, very few do. Information flow is critical in this adventure. The PCs have to learn about the oil refinery so they can begin the assault phase. As written, the only pointer to the insurgent compound is at the oil refinery. That's not necessarily a terrible thing if we just get a lot more ways to find the oil refinery. Now, as we move through each of the 4 investigation locations in more detail, I'm going to show you how this can be fixed. The spaceport content contains 2 pointers as written. The HMS Magpie, which says that the captain is at the bar, but it doesn't explicitly tell the PCs that, and there are no other NPCs listed here. So how would they find that out? So when I run it, I leave a few crew members here doing minor tasks, and they can tell the PCs that she's at the bar. There's also a hangar incident where a colonist named Connor claims he saw the AWOLs last night at the bar. That's a good way of giving them the information, but it requires rolling a 1 to 2 on a D6 roll, and there's only a 33% chance of that happening. The other content is good, evocative. It builds up the world, which is why I talk so much about putting interesting things in dungeon designs. There's a medical frigate on landing pad A, but it's in standby, guarded by 12 Marines, loaded with colony equipment. This is great. It reinforces that the AWOLs are preventing everyone else from getting away because the colonel can't risk those guys getting on this boat. But you could also add a pointer here, a Marine that tells you they had a soldier ask about medical care and they had to defer them to the medical facility. It wouldn't even have to be one of the AWOLs. It could just be a regular soldier, but the idea gets put in the player's head. Oh, somebody could have gone to the medical facility. There's also a mob of colonists in Hangar 2, eager to get off the planet. This triggers a hangar incident. Again, 33% chance unless you force it to happen. I think this is a great visual, more reinforcement of the desperate situation that everybody's in, but we can add more pointers here as well. If the PCs stop the terrorist incident, maybe this guy has a comm unit on him that can be examined with a Comtech role and used to track back the last transmission to the oil refinery. The insurgents at the oil refinery have a space Soviet comm unit that they're using, and you can use it to pinpoint the insurgent compound. So this will mesh well with that in the future. And if the mob riots, there's going to be a lot of arrests, and the PCs might be asked to take some of those prisoners to the marshal's office for containment. And if the mob riots hard, a Marine might be critically injured, and the PCs might be asked to transport them to the medical facility ASAP for medical care. It could be snowing really hard at this point, which I'm going to discuss later with other events, so air evac might not be a viable option. And then there's the control tower, which has very little use as written, which is a shame considering all this great description. It says that the PCs can access the fort's mainframe from here, even pointing to page 43. But there's nothing on the mainframe description on page 43 that would help them at this time. All of this stuff is aimed at the late stages of the game. So, of course, the GM could improvise something, but I'm not even sure why this page reference is here, honestly. I think it would be far better to allow the players to have the same interaction that they can have at the Marshal Station, maybe with a communications officer here who can give you access to all this stuff. So now the spaceport is no longer a dead-end location. It still points back at the bar, but it also points to the medical facility, either by the Marine that says you can't use the medical frigate, or the PCs being asked to transport a wounded Marine directly there. It also points to the Marshal Station, either by the PCs being asked to transport arrested rioters, or by talking to that communications officer. And finally, it could conceivably point to the oil refinery if the PCs analyze the terrorist space Soviet comm unit. Pointers are good, essential, even in classic Keep on the Borderlands style modules where you're not being relentlessly hounded by aliens and an impending space Soviet invasion. But they need to be written into the text as often as possible to make it easier for the GM to give them out to the PCs. We can't shove all the responsibility on the GM to kind of figure out a way to say it in every location. Put something there for the GM to use. So let's move on to the Oblivion bar. The manager will tell them that the AWOLs were there and provide them with camera footage of it. If they make an observation roll, they can ID Ivan Stoles and learn that he is at the Marshal Station. And Eddie, the captain of the HMS Magpie, is drinking at the bar. She can tell the PCs that she was asked to transport people off-world. But I want to highlight this particular element. Look at the language here. It says the PCs recover a grainy photo. Running a check against it and making an observation roll will identify Ivan Stoles, and if they check with the Marshal Station, they can learn that he has already been picked up for questioning. This is a common issue in this adventure and many others, so I want to examine it. I like to look hard at where the rubber meets the road. How exactly is the GM communicating this stuff to the players? Are you supposed to tell them that they can make an observation roll, or are you supposed to wait for them to come up with that idea on their own? And are you supposed to outright say to them, you could check with the Marshal Station on this guy? Or are you going to have their computer just give them that information automatically? Or are you going to have them wait and ask you to check with the Marshal station and ask them about this guy? This is part of what I meant at the beginning with the Lego analogy. All of these ideas are good. It's just not clear how you're supposed to use them. And this is one situation, one paragraph. Now multiply that throughout the entire book. So much is being left to the GM to figure out. And at a certain point, it just maxes out your bandwidth. So let's take a look at what else we have in the bar. There's a discussion of people using special candy. Sorry, I have to sanitize this for YouTube. I think it's intended as a way to get the manager on the floor without the PCs having to ask for them, but I've never really used it that way. I like to have a bunch of the degenerates try to get out of the bar at once, forcing the PCs to spread themselves out. And then I use this other part where two insurgents also try to slip out and contact their leader and tell them that the Marines are here asking about the AWOLs. Now the PCs are having individual interactions with multiple NPCs, all of them shady, and they're trying to figure out who's good and who's bad. And one of the insurgents has a gun, he could pull that out and shit could go sideways really fast. This has resulted in really good role-playing experiences for me. I had one captain just lose his patient and start kneecapping everybody. I had another start arresting everybody they could get their hands on. It would be very easy for most GMs to improvise all this chaos into a pointer that goes to the Marshal station, no matter what happens, but especially if that insurgent pulls a gun. And if anyone gets hurt, emergency transport to the medical facility becomes another potential pointer. And you could also have one of the insurgents carrying a comm unit, just like at the spaceport, and that could trace back to the oil refinery. There's also a dancer here that complains about the AWOLs not tipping her. It's decent as written, but I think you could easily add a line of dialogue where she says she saw one of the bastards get arrested for drunken disorderly, and it serves him right. That would be yet another pointer to the Marshal station. And that leaves the manager's office, which is packed with all sorts of goodies and cash. But I have never been able to even use this content because nothing ever tells the PCs that there is even a safe in here. So if I ran this again, I would give one of the insurgents a note or a device that indicates there's money in here and they're planning on stealing it for the insurgency. That note could also describe a safe place they found to hide it at the oil refinery. And there's also one more unconnected dot. One of the pregens is actually addicted to X-Stem's private hammer, and there's a bunch of them in that safe. And if he doesn't take one every shift, roughly 6 hours, he gains stress, and he can't get rid of stress without X-Stems. So that stash is going to be very tempting to him. And I would put a lot of ideas in Hammer's brain about those X-Stems, and that would introduce another angle that could be worked. So now we can add a new layer of pointers to the map. The drunk captain tells them there are people trying to get off-world at the spaceport. The camera footage reveals Ivan Stolz detained at the Marshal station. So would arresting people who are using the special candy, or arresting insurgents, or finding out from the dancer that she didn't get a tip and that a guy got drunk and arrested later on. People getting hurt is much more likely with a lot of my suggested changes, and that has the potential as well to lead to the medical facility. And the insurgent could be carrying a comm unit that reveals the oil refinery, or carrying a note about a secret cache in a manager's safe that indicates a hiding spot at the refinery. And all of these arrows are yellow because we're still in the first part of the investigation. I've only provided you with an overview of the adventure, talked about preparing to run it, and the first two locations. There are so many more Legos. Amazing Legos, you have no idea. Space Soviet invasion, black goo from the sky, and a huge dungeon of carnage and chaos. But I can't do it all in one video. I'm just one man. I'll see you in part 2. Chubby Funster out.